There is a silent moment between breath and thought in which something profound reveals itself, the premonition that we are not living for the first time. It is in this space that Dolores Cannon used to say the soul whispers. She affirmed that every human being carries within them a dormant memory, a recollection of eras in which we understood the purpose of existence. But at birth, we accept the veil of forgetfulness. From that moment on, life transforms into an unconscious search to rediscover what was never lost. What we call discipline, effort, or overcoming challenges is, in fact, a reflection of this pursuit. We try to control our impulses, impose our will, conquer fatigue, without realizing that we are merely fighting against the very design of the human experience. Dolores said that the body is an extraordinary tool, but imperfect for those who have forgotten its origin. The brain was shaped to conserve energy, avoid risks, and seek quick rewards. It is an ancient mechanism, created to survive in forests, not to awaken in digital civilizations. However, it is within the brain that the soul needs to dwell. Therefore, the mind struggles between two opposing impulses, that of matter, which desires rest, and that of the spirit, which yearns for expansion. This tension is the root of all feelings of failure. Human beings believe they lack willpower, but what is lacking is understanding. We try to evolve by force, as if we could force nature to bend to consciousness. And every time we fail, we believe ourselves to be weak. Dolores observed in her regressions that this guilt is one of the greatest misconceptions of the earthly journey. No one is weak for feeling resistance. Resistance is a sign that two frequencies coexist within us, one ancient and instinctive, which protects, and another eternal and expansive, which calls. She said that the human body is a learning capsule. It endures not because it wants to prevent growth, but because it was designed to preserve vital energy. When we feel lazy, procrastinate, or afraid, we are not facing enemies. We are facing biological guardians, mechanisms that ensure the body survives long enough for the soul to complete its lesson. But as the ages passed, we forgot this. We began to punish ourselves for feeling tired, as if rest were a sin. We came to believe that productivity is a virtue and that silence is a waste. That is how we distanced ourselves from the natural wisdom of the very system we inhabit. Dolores believed that understanding this architecture is the first step to breaking free from the cycle of self-sabotage. The brain is not against you. It is simply fulfilling its ancestral function. It wants comfort because comfort once meant survival. It seeks dopamine because pleasure once meant security. And the soul, upon entering this body, needs to learn to guide this mechanism with respect. It's not about dominating the brain, but about redesigning the agreement between matter and spirit. When a human being tries to force the body to obey the soul through the violence of will, it creates conflict. When it understands that it can guide the mind with wisdom and gentleness, it creates harmony. In many sessions, Dolores heard the voices of the so-called old souls, consciousnesses that had returned to Earth to assist in the collective awakening. These souls described the same feeling, a profound weariness, an inexplicable nostalgia, as if they were trapped in a body that did not match the frequency of its inhabitant. They felt unproductive, scattered, and demotivated. But upon returning to moments before incarnation, they all remembered that they had chosen this limitation out of love. Resistance, they discovered, was not punishment, but a tool. Forgetting was not punishment, but a method. Dolores said that life on Earth is like advanced training for consciousness. Every difficulty is a carefully designed simulation. There is no error in the system, there is purpose. When human beings understand this, the internal war ceases. They stop trying to impose discipline and begin to create conditions for balance to happen naturally. And it is here that the notion of design takes on a spiritual meaning. True discipline is born not from effort, but from structure. When the environment, the rhythm, and the rituals are in tune with the essence, the mind cooperates, the body follows, and the soul finally breathes. This realization changes everything. Suddenly you understand that it's not the failure of a weak being, but the learning of a powerful soul within a limited vehicle. Procrastination, fear, and discouragement cease to be monsters and become messages. Every impulse to give up carries the hidden question: are you trying to act from fear or from memory? Dolores said that true discipline is the harmony between biology and spirit, not a duel, but a dialogue. It's when the body understands that serving the soul is not dying to itself, and the soul understands that guiding the body is not enslaving it. But how many times do we ignore this conversation? How many times do we force ourselves to pursue goals that don't resonate with who we truly are? How many times do we believe we need to fix ourselves, when in reality, we only need to remember? That's the trap. Confusing effort with evolution. Dolores warned that every path based on force ends in exhaustion, because the spirit did not come to earth to fight against the body, but to illuminate it. When the light of consciousness touches the nature of the brain, it doesn't destroy it, it reprograms it. Ultimately, what we call a lack of discipline is a symptom of a soul still guided by the language of survival. We live like hunters in a world of supercomputers, trying to survive threats that no longer exist, trapped in impulses that no longer serve us. But awakening begins when we look at this old programming with tenderness. When we stop blaming ourselves for being human and begin to celebrate the opportunity to transcend limitation through understanding. Dolores believed that it is at this point that the soul begins to remember. And the first fragment of this recollection is simple. You are not your resistance. It is merely the echo of a time when fighting was necessary. Today, the call is different. The new stage of consciousness does not call for war. It calls for integration. Mind, body, and spirit need to work as a single symphony. And the conductor is you, the part of yourself that observes, that understands, that awakens. In the end, the great revelation she left echoing was this: nothing in you is broken. Nothing needs fixing, just being remembered. The brain, instinct, and impulse are fragments of the same whole, each fulfilling its function within the cosmic dance of evolution. Discipline is not the whip of progress. It is the art of aligning oneself with the universal design itself. And as you listen to these words, something inside you begins to stir. It's recognition, a whisper from within. You're not learning anything new, just remembering. And it is in that instant, in that brief return of consciousness, that the first portal opens. There are times when we feel that something within us is divided, as if two forces are vying for control of the same existence. It's an almost physical sensation. The body wants rest, but something invisible compels it to continue. The mind seeks logic, while the heart whispers secrets that cannot be put into words. Dolores Cannon said that this is humanity's oldest conflict, the silent struggle between the fearful mind and the remembering soul. During her regression sessions, she saw this clash repeating itself in countless stories, in different eras and bodies. Always the same pattern, a consciousness trying to find harmony within a machine designed to survive. She recounted how many of her patients arrived exhausted, believing they had failed because they couldn't stay focused or have willpower. They wanted to be disciplined, productive, unwavering, but deep down they were just trying to survive their own inner noise. Dolores listened attentively and, instead of offering formulas, asked simple questions. Who is tired, the mind or the soul? Most didn't know the answer. It was then that she realized that humanity was trapped in a kind of functional amnesia. We remembered how to think, but we forgot how to listen. Imagine the daily routine of any person. The alarm clock rings, the body feels heavy. There are tasks, deadlines, promises piling up. The mind screams lists and obligations, while the heart tries to murmur something that is rarely heard. Sitting in traffic, the body operates on autopilot. On social media, the mind seeks stimulation, but beneath it all, there is a silent presence observing every gesture. It is this presence that Dolores called true consciousness, the fragment of the whole that observes, but is rarely recognized. She said that the human mind believes it is in control, but it is merely the narrator of a story that was already written on another level. During a regression session, a man once reported seeing two versions of himself. One, tense and agitated, trying to solve everything logically. The other, serene and distant, simply observing. When Dolores asked who the observing version was, he replied, "It's me, before I was born." This phrase, she recounted, changed the course of that session and of her own research. There was proof that the everyday mind is merely a limited projection of the greater consciousness that dwells within each of us. And that is precisely why we try to control the uncontrollable, because we forget that we are already being guided. However, this memory doesn't come easily. The mind, like any biological structure, fears losing control. It was created to protect, predict, and calculate. When it senses that something greater wants to take command, it reacts with resistance. That's why the awakening process often begins with discomfort. Dolores used to compare this phase to a butterfly breaking free from its cocoon. The mind is the cocoon that is dissolving, and fear is the inevitable friction between the old and the new. Discipline, in this context, ceases to be the effort to control instinct and becomes the exercise of trusting the flow. She said that true focus isn't on the insistent mind, but on the soul's alignment. When body and spirit are in harmony, the right actions seem to happen on their own. And perhaps you've already felt this. That instant when everything flows. When words come out clearly, the body moves lightly, and time seems to cooperate. It's in these moments that the higher self manifests, even if the mind doesn't perceive it. The problem is that we've been trained to doubt what is simple. The mind wants proof, results, security, and so we distance ourselves from the natural wisdom that springs from silence. Dolores used to remind us that the human mind is like an old computer trying to decipher quantum codes. It's not an enemy, but it lacks the capacity to comprehend the whole, and the mistake lies in demanding something from it that it cannot offer. We try to solve spiritual dilemmas with the tools of logic and become frustrated when nothing seems to fit. That's why she taught us to observe our own thoughts with curiosity, without judgment. The mind is an instrument, not the conductor, she would say. When it tries to conduct on its own, the music is lost. But when it learns to listen to the soul, the symphony rearranges itself. In one of her lectures, Dolores told the story of a woman who said she felt useless because she couldn't follow a perfect routine. She wanted to wake up early, meditate, eat well, work with focus, but she failed every day. During the session, the woman saw herself in another life, as a healer living isolated in the mountains, in total harmony with the cycles of nature. There she learned that time is not measured by clocks but by pulses of energy. When she returned from this memory, she was crying. She told Dolores, "I was trying to live at a pace that isn't mine." From that day on, instead of forcing herself, she began to observe her own body, to respect its pauses, to design a routine according to her vibration. In a few weeks, effortlessly, she felt disciplined for the first time. This is how the mind begins to bow to the wisdom of the soul, not through force but through understanding. And this shift is imperceptible, yet definitive. One day, you wake up and realize you are no longer fighting against yourself. What was once tiredness becomes conscious pause. What was guilt transforms into clarity. What was confusion becomes direction. Dolores said that this is the moment when the driver awakens and the vehicle finally obeys. The mind remains there, doing its job, but now it is consciousness that holds the steering wheel. Still, this harmony is delicate. The modern world feeds distractions that hijack the mind every second. Screens, sounds, notifications, tiny sparks of dopamine that keep the brain in a constant state of alert. That's why, even when we try to meditate, read, or focus, something within us wanders. It's not weakness, it's programming. The mind has learned to seek quick rewards, and without realizing it, we begin to build environments that reinforce this dependence. Dolores called this the architecture of forgetting. According to her, we live in scenarios designed to distract from inner reflection. Houses full of noise, packed schedules, spaces that encourage doing but not being. The physical environment becomes a mirror of the fragmented mind, and that's where the inner conflict finds its battlefield, within the space we inhabit. She said that true awakening begins when we start to change the landscape around us, when we realize that the sacred can reside in our work desk, in tidying our room, in the simple act of preparing coffee with mindfulness. Because every conscious gesture is a reprogramming of the environment, and therefore of our own mind. But what if the secret wasn't just in changing what we see, but in see? What if every noise, every distraction, every obstacle were a mirror projected by the soul to test how much we are willing to remember? Dolores believed this, that nothing happens by chance, and that even the chaos of modern life serves a greater purpose, to teach us to find silence amidst the noise. Perhaps this is the most profound message of the second stage of this journey. The discipline we seek is not in control, but in listening. The mind wants to dominate, but the soul wants to integrate. When humans understand this difference, the conflict dissolves. The body ceases to be the enemy, the world ceases to be a threat, and daily life with all its imperfections becomes the sacred field where consciousness awakens. And it is precisely at that moment, when the mind begins to listen and the world around it responds, that the second portal opens. There is a silent force that governs human behavior without our realizing it. It doesn't come from the conscious mind or the depths of the unconscious. It comes from the environment. Dolores Cannon called this field the matrix of experience, a set of invisible influences that shape our daily decisions, like subtle currents guiding the course of a river. It is in this space that the soul tests its autonomy. Most people believe they freely choose what they do, what they eat, what they desire. But if you observe carefully, you will see that almost all your choices are responses to what surrounds you. Sounds, lights, objects, people, memories, atmospheres. The environment is a quantum mirror that reflects the internal vibration, and at the same time, amplifies it. Dolores used to say that Earth is a school that teaches through material symbols. Each room, each city, each landscape is an extension of the state of consciousness of its inhabitant. The disorganized room of an anxious person is neither cause nor effect, it's continuity. The house, the work, the traffic, the cell phone, all participate in an energetic choreography that confirms and reinforces the predominant frequency of each being. When a person changes their environment, something in their vibration changes as well. And when the vibration changes, the environment inevitably responds. It's a continuous cycle, so subtle that it's rarely perceived. But what happens when this cycle is distorted? When the space around us no longer reflects who we are, but who we were. Dolores observed in her regressions that many souls remain trapped in life patterns that no longer correspond to their current frequency. They continue to frequent places, maintain routines, and associate with people who resonate with older versions of themselves. The result is an energetic imbalance that manifests as tiredness, boredom, or resistance. The soul tries to move forward, but the environment anchors it to the past. It's like trying to breathe in a room without air. How many times have you entered a place and felt that something there was draining your energy, even for no apparent reason? How many times have you noticed that a simple change of scenery sparked new ideas or emotions? This is not coincidence, it's resonance. Each environment carries a vibrational signature that interacts with your personal field. Dolores explained that, at the quantum level, everything is an exchange of information, and that the soul reads this information all the time, even if the mind ignores it. During a session, a patient described seeing herself living in a small gray apartment. There was silence, but it was a heavy silence. Not the silence of peace, but rather the silence of stagnation. When Dolores asked what was preventing her from leaving, the woman replied, "The fear of losing what I already know." This simple phrase became a recurring metaphor in her lectures, because that's exactly what happens to us. We confuse security with familiarity. We prefer environments that keep us small to spaces that invite us to the unknown. But what if the environment were not just the backdrop of life, but an active character with a will of its own? Dolores believed that places also learn from us. She said that walls hold echoes, that objects retain memories, and that each space can become a field of healing or blockage, depending on the intention placed there. An unbalanced home is not just a reflection of mental disorder. It is a vibrational organism asking for reprogramming. Imagine the power of living in a space that works in your favor, a welcoming room, an inspiring workspace, a purposefully designed routine. It's not about aesthetics, but about energy. Dolores called this the spiritual engineering of everyday life, the act of transforming the environment into an ally for awakening. She said that when a person lights a candle, sets a table, opens a window, or consciously chooses what they listen to, they are actually adjusting the frequencies of their own field. Small gestures that create great portals. But do we realize the power that the environment exerts over us? Doesn't the control we seek over the mind begin with the control of physical space? Dolores said that the mind is malleable like clay, but that the environment is the mold. Without the right mold, the mind reverts to its old form. Therefore, insisting on changing behavior without altering the environment is like trying to dance on a mind stage. The terrain cannot support the movement. During a trip to Egypt, Dolores recounted feeling such a dense energy upon entering certain ancient chambers that her body reacted before her mind could comprehend it. She said that these places held not only history, but also the vibration of those who built them. The environment is the memory of humanity crystallized in form, she said. If this applies to temples and pyramids, It also applies to our homes, our offices, our habits. Every wall, every object is an archive of our own vibrational history. As we understand this, something profoundly changes. We begin to consciously create the environment. The cell phone, once an enemy of concentration, becomes a tool for discipline when set to silence. The workspace, once chaotic, becomes a ritual when each item carries an intention. The home ceases to be a refuge from fatigue and becomes a laboratory of consciousness. Dolores said that the difference between a common environment and a sacred one lies in the degree of presence of the person who occupies it. But what if it wasn't just about the physical environment? What if there were emotional, mental, invisible environments that we also inhabit without realizing it? What if the true battlefield lay in the subtle atmospheres we carry with us wherever we go? This was the provocation Dolores left in the last lectures of her life. According to her, the true environment is not what is outside, but what we carry inside. The external world is merely the holographic projection of this internal field. When the interior becomes disordered, the exterior becomes chaotic. When the interior is balanced, the exterior responds as a reflection. She said that every thought, every emotion, every belief creates microclimates around the soul. Some are luminous, others dense. We walk through these climates without noticing, and they determine how we perceive the world. That's why changing cities, houses, or jobs can provide temporary relief. But true transformation happens when we reorganize our internal environment. That made up of memories, beliefs, and vibrations. From that point on, everything around us ceases to be an obstacle and becomes an instrument. Light, sound, silence, even urban chaos. Everything can become a means of expansion if used consciously. Dolores believed that we are learning to manipulate this energetic architecture, little by little. That one day we will understand that the entire universe is our environment, and that every gesture, every thought, and every choice modifies the landscape of reality. But there was a question she let echo with mystery. If the environment shapes behavior, and behavior shapes the environment, then who is the original architect? Is it humankind, collective consciousness, or something even greater, observing from outside of time? Dolores never answered. She would only smile and say, "When you become the environment, the question disappears." And perhaps that is the revelation of the third portal, to realize that the world around us is not a backdrop, but a living extension of the observer. That every wall breathes, every sound teaches, and every space, physical or invisible, is a mirror inviting the soul to remember its own architecture. There comes a point when habit ceases to be mere behavior and transforms into code. Dolores Cannon said that humans believe they consciously choose their actions, but most of what they do is the result of invisible routines, repeated so many times that they have become stable frequencies in the body's energy field. She called this quantum circuits of the soul, vibrational structures that form from repetition. Each thought, gesture, or emotion creates an energy line that, over time, consolidates into permanent pathways. These pathways are so powerful that they can span entire lifetimes. During her regressions, Dolores observed people who, upon returning to other existences, realized that the same patterns repeated themselves. Delays, fears, impulses, relationships that seemed to change face but not essence. A woman who said she couldn't hold down a job found herself, in another life, fleeing villages for fear of taking on responsibilities. A man who sabotaged his relationships discovered that centuries before, he had taken vows of celibacy. In both cases, the pattern persisted because the habit, once installed in the soul's field, continued to manifest until it was given new meaning. Dolores said this explained why some people fight against themselves. They are not just confronting a behavior, but rewriting ancestral codes. These findings seemed improbable until science began to demonstrate curious phenomena. Neuroplasticity studies showed that the physical brain creates neural pathways based on repetition, strengthening synapses the more an action is performed. The fascinating thing is that the same occurs at an energetic level. Just as the brain creates electrical pathways, the spiritual field creates vibrational pathways. Therefore, changing a habit requires much more than willpower. It requires conscious reprogramming of the energetic pathway. Dolores explained that the secret lies in inserting a new impulse within the existing routine. Instead of trying to erase the old path, a bifurcation is created. She recounted that once, During a regression session, an engineer described seeing his brain as a network of lights. Each habit appeared as a luminous filament, pulsing in sequence. When he imagined a new action, a different strand would begin to form, but it would soon fade if not fed by repetition. Dolores asked what happened when he persisted with the new idea. He replied, "The old strand disconnects as if it lost its purpose." This seemed like a metaphor, but when compared to scientific discoveries about synaptic pruning, the process by which the brain literally deactivates unused connections, the correspondence was astonishing. The physical mind and the energy field obey the same principles. What is nourished is strengthened. What is ignored fades. Dolores used this to teach that real change begins with small conscious insertions. After each automatic act, insert a moment of presence, she would say. After brushing your teeth, take a deep breath. After turning off the alarm clock, think about something you love. After closing the front door, repeat an intention for the day. These micro gestures create splits of light in the automatism of routine, and over time, the brain and soul reorganize themselves around them. This is how habit ceases to be an enemy and becomes an ally. But the process isn't always smooth. The mind resists because it fears losing the familiar. During a regression, a man trying to overcome his alcohol addiction found himself in an unlikely scene, working in a medieval tavern, serving drinks to travelers. There, his role was to offer comfort and companionship. Dolores understood that alcohol, in his current life, was merely a symbol of the same ancestral impulse, the desire to belong, to welcome and be welcomed. When the man understood this, the addiction lost its meaning. He didn't need to fight the habit. He needed to fulfill the original need for connection. This story became one of Dolores's favorites because it demonstrated that all repetitive behavior, even destructive behavior, is a distorted attempt to heal something. What if habits are actually coded messages from the soul, trying to remind you of what needs to be balanced? What if each repetition is a way for the unconscious to draw your attention to an unfinished lesson? Dolores believed exactly that. The soul doesn't punish, it repeats. And it repeats until the lesson becomes conscious. There are curious accounts of people who, by changing small routines, reported larger and unexpected changes. A woman who decided to walk every day at the same time began, after a few weeks, to dream of landscapes from other lives. A teenager who adopted the habit of writing down 3 daily expressions of gratitude noticed that his anxiety attacks decreased effortlessly. In both cases, it wasn't the act itself that transformed, but the frequency created by consistency. Dolores used to say that repetition, when done with presence, opens portals. She herself experienced this in her routine. For decades, she maintained the habit of writing down by hand everything she discovered in her regressions. She didn't use recorders, even when technology allowed it. She said that the physical movement of writing created a direct bridge between the conscious mind and quantum memory. It was as if each letter were a thread of energy, connecting worlds. In an interview, she revealed that some of the most profound insights emerged precisely while she was transcribing her notes. "The words began to change before my eyes," she said. "It was as if another part of me was completing the text." Science might call this a state of flow, but for Dolores it was more than that. It was the fusion of habit and consciousness. When a repeated act becomes ritual, it transcends the behavioral level and reaches the spiritual. What was once mechanical becomes meaningful. This is why ancient civilizations placed so much importance on everyday gestures: lighting a flame, preparing food, sweeping the floor. They were simple practices, but performed with absolute presence, transforming routine into prayer. And perhaps that's what we've forgotten. In the modern world, we've transformed habit into automatism and ritual into obligation. We live in repetition mode, but without awareness. Dolores said that the challenge of the new era is to restore the link between action and intention. It's not about doing more, it's about doing with purpose. The difference between a banal gesture and a sacred gesture lies only in the quality of attention. She would end many of her lectures with a provocation. Do you want to change your life? Then observe what you do without thinking. There lies your true destiny. For her, every unconscious action is a portal waiting to be illuminated. Transformation doesn't happen suddenly, but in small openings, the moment when you interrupt the pattern and for a second, choose again. What if everything you need to change the course of your own life could fit into a 2-second interval? Dolores believed so, because it is in that lapse between impulse and awareness that free will truly exists. And when that choice becomes conscious, the old habit dissolves, the soul breathes, and a new path of light is ignited, a brand new route on the vast map of memories we call existence. There's a point in the journey where everything seems to grind to a halt. It's when you know what you should do, you feel the calling, but still something invisible paralyzes you. It's as if the body becomes heavy and the mind fills with noise. Dolores Cannon said that this is the most dangerous and, at the same time, the most revealing moment, because the soul never hesitates. It is the mind that hesitates, fearing the unknown. She called this state procrastination of the soul, a threshold between the old and the new, where the spirit tries to advance but matter resists. During her sessions, she repeatedly witnessed this phenomenon. People who knew on some level what they needed to change, but couldn't act. It wasn't laziness, but rather a vibrational misalignment. Action and purpose weren't on the same frequency. In one of these regressions, a man who described himself as unable to move on was led to a past life. There, he found himself standing before a huge stone door, knowing he should go through it, but fearing what lay on the other side. Dolores asked what was beyond the door. He replied, "Everything I can be." The silence that followed was almost physical. When he returned from the regression, that man realized the door wasn't symbolic. It was the very decision to act. Procrastination is this: a consciousness paralyzed in the face of its own expansion. And the fear that accompanies it is not of failure, but of transformation. Change requires dying a little, dying to the known, to control, to the constructed identity. Dolores said that behind every postponement there is a part of the being trying to protect itself from its own evolution. It is an ancient instinct, the same one that made our ancestors hesitate before exploring new territory. But what once guaranteed survival, today prevents growth. She recounted a curious case, a young woman who, despite being intelligent and creative, abandoned all projects shortly before finishing them. During regression therapy, she saw herself as a nun copying sacred manuscripts, a task that never came to an end because, according to her, the text transformed as I copied it. Dolores realized that the pattern had spanned centuries, an unconscious fear of finishing, of making the invisible definitive. When the young woman understood this, she began to complete everything she started, as if an entire cycle of lives had finally closed. But what happens when fear is so great that even consciousness cannot dispel it? Dolores said that in such cases the universe intervenes. She called it the law of cosmic interruption. Unexpected situations, a loss, an encounter, a crisis, arise to break the vicious cycle of stagnation. It is the cosmos's way of pushing the being out of its cocoon. She told of an executive who, after an unexpected dismissal, sought her sessions in despair. During regression, he discovered that, before he was born, he had requested an experience that would force him to change direction. The loss was the catalyst he himself had programmed. "You weren't punished," she said. "You just gave yourself the push you needed." How many times, without realizing it, do we cause our own ruptures? How many illnesses, conflicts, or misunderstandings are merely vibrational alarms trying to awaken us? Dolores believed that nothing is random. When we postpone something we know to be essential for too long, reality takes care of accelerating the process. What we call chaos is simply the movement of the universe trying to align us with our original purpose. There's a tension in this discovery, an inevitable discomfort, because accepting this is admitting that we are co-authors of everything, including delays and pain, but it's also liberating. If we create stagnation, we can create momentum. Dolores taught how to reconvert fear into the energy of movement. She asked patients to imagine inertia as a condensed form of power, an accumulated energy waiting for direction. Procrastination is the soul taking a deep breath before the leap, she said, but you need to leap. She observed that the decisive moment is never as dramatic as in the movies. Often, the leap boils down to a minimal gesture, sending a message, telling a truth, initiating an action that seemed small, but alters the entire axis of destiny. The universe doesn't demand grandeur, it demands sincerity. When the gesture comes from the center of the soul, everything around it begins to reorganize itself. But there's a subtle risk, confusing movement with noise. The mind, perceiving the strength of the call, may try to simulate action just to escape the silence. We end up filling our time with tasks, commitments, goals, believing we are moving forward when, in reality, we are only going in circles. Dolores warned that acting without purpose is another form of procrastination. The difference is that now inertia disguises itself as productivity. Therefore, she said, before acting, it is necessary to ask, where does this movement come from? From fear or from memory? Once, a patient who had lost everything in a fire asked Dolores why the universe had taken her home away from her. In regression, she saw herself in a past life as a woman who obsessively accumulated possessions, unable to let go of anything. The fire, in her current life, had been a symbol of purification, the destruction of excess that impeded flow. When she returned, she understood. The fire had not punished her, it had liberated her. Dolores used to say that when the soul is ready to move and the ego resists, the fire comes, sometimes literally, sometimes symbolically. And that's why the fear of movement is, in essence, the fear of freedom. When you truly accept action, there's no turning back. With each authentic decision, an old version of you dies, and another is born. That's the real reason we procrastinate, not out of laziness, but because we intuit, even without knowing it, that after the action, nothing will be the same. Dolores concluded this part of her lectures with a firm and compassionate voice. Procrastination is not the end of the road, it's the last portal before crossing over. And perhaps that's exactly what you're feeling now, the tension of something big about to happen. The old crumbles, the new breathes, and time seems to bend for an instant. You know you can't wait any longer. And when finally the decision is made, even if silent, even if minimal, the entire universe responds. Because the movement of the soul is contagious. And the moment you allow yourself to take the first step, everything that was still begins to move as well. It is at this turning point between fear and courage that the fifth portal opens, and the world, around and within you, changes direction. There comes a moment when all truths come together, and what once seemed fragmented finally makes sense. Dolores Cannon said that true awakening doesn't happen amidst thunder or grand visions, but in the silence after understanding. It's when the human being realizes there's nothing to win, because there was never any enemy, only parts of themselves trying to reconcile. The mind that resisted, the body that feared, the environment that distracted, the habit that imprisoned, all of that existed only to lead you here, to the point you remember. Throughout the journey, the soul learns to dialogue with humanity. First, by trying through force, through pain, loss, and delays, then through presence. And when the learning is assimilated, it ceases the effort. The soul does not want control, it wants collaboration. It does not want perfection, it wants awareness. And this is the synthesis of everything Dolores taught. The purpose of life is not to fight against human nature, but to illuminate it with understanding, discipline, overcoming challenges, changing habits, harmony with the environment. None of this is imposed. It is a natural consequence for those who live awakened. She said that the awakened human being no longer needs imposed goals or forced promises. They act because action is an expression of their state of being. Everything becomes flow. Food, work, rest, speech, everything aligns with the rhythm of the soul. Life ceases to be something you try to control and transforms into something that responds to your level of presence. It is at this point that the old struggle for discipline dissolves and gives way to a state of natural order. You don't need to force yourself to act correctly. You simply allow yourself to act coherently. Dolores used to tell the story of a woman who, after understanding these principles, changed something very simple. She stopped starting her day looking at her cell phone and began opening the window first. In a few weeks, her anxiety decreased, her sleep improved, and she felt that everything flowed more smoothly. There was no magic, just harmony. The gesture was small, but it symbolized the inversion of the axis, from reaction to conscious choice. And that's how every transformation begins, with a humble decision, but full of intention. Consciousness doesn't expand in giant leaps, but in daily millimeters. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you observe instead of judging, every time you choose presence instead of haste, you are reprogramming your own reality. Dolores said that each conscious thought is like a tiny particle of light traveling to the past and the future, rewriting versions of yourself that you haven't yet understood. Therefore, Changing now doesn't just affect your present. It affects everything you were and everything you will be. But the most important thing is to understand that remembering who you are doesn't require isolation or escaping the world. Awakening happens within ordinary life, in conversations, tasks, relationships, pauses, and new beginnings. You don't need to abandon anything. You just need to inhabit what already is, with full presence. When the mind tries to control, it closes itself off. When the heart takes over, it opens paths. And in this opening, the universe reorganizes itself around you. There is no more accurate map than intuition itself. Dolores used to say that the voice of the soul is serene, yet insistent, and that the simpler the next step, the truer it will be. The spiritual path is not made of grand revelations, but of small daily reminders. And when you recognize them, even in the most mundane things, you realize that the sacred has always been there, in the act of breathing, in the understanding gaze, in the silent desire to be better than yesterday. Everything you've heard so far isn't a manual, but a mirror. The video doesn't aim to teach you anything new. It simply wants to help you remember. Discipline, environment, habits, the courage to act, all are expressions of a single truth. You are the creator of your own frequency. And when that frequency changes, the world changes with you. What once seemed impossible begins to align, and coincidences cease to be chance and become confirmation. Now, the invitation is simple yet profound. Try putting into practice what you felt during this journey. Choose a habit, a gesture, an attitude, just one, and transform it into a point of light. Make it your daily reminder that awareness can guide your routine. Observe the effect of this. See how the environment reacts, how people approach you, how the answers arrive. That's how change happens from the inside out, with purpose, with lightness, with truth. And if these words touched you deeply, if for a moment they made sense, brought calm or sparked curiosity, share that vibration. Like this video, leave a comment, even anonymously, and subscribe to the channel, not just to support the work, but to declare to the universe that you are ready to continue this journey of remembrance. Because the simple act of manifesting is a way of saying, I choose to awaken. And when that choice is made, Dolores Cannon whispers somewhere between time and space, you're not learning anything new, you're just remembering.